The sky burns with a sickly green light. Dr. Eris Thorne stares at his console as a frantic voice crackles from the orbital observatory. The transmission is breaking apart, but the final, desperate words are chilling. Anomalous object detected. It is not an asteroid. Trajectory confirms direct impact. Then, only static remains. This is the beginning of Earth's final days, a story of ultimate loss and a desperate flight for survival. By the end of this journey, you will witness the incredible legacy born from our world's final hours, and discover what it means to carry a whole planet's memory into the cold stars. We faced an end that was both absolute and mysterious, a force that rewrote our understanding of the universe itself. What would you save if you knew everything was about to vanish? The silence in the Global Defense Council chamber was heavier than lead. General Ada Karim stood before the assembled world leaders, her face a mask of professional calm that did not reach her eyes. The projections confirmed total atmospheric annihilation upon impact, she stated, her voice steady but grim, each word falling with the weight of a final verdict. There will be no firestorms, no earthquakes in the conventional sense. The object will deliver a pulse that unravels our air itself. Our only hope is the Exodus fleet. She paused, letting the awful truth settle in the room. The fleet is our greatest engineering achievement, a testament to human collaboration, yet we can only save a fraction. A single, devastating word that echoed the fate of billions. Outside, the first shuttles began their ascent, their engines painting faint, hopeful lines against the deepening twilight. And then it appeared. No longer a data point on a screen, the object now named Nemesis became visible to the naked eye. A cold, unwinking star growing steadily brighter, a silent promise of the end. It was a sight that bypassed all reason and went straight to the primal fear in every human heart. How do you choose who gets a seat on the last lifeboats leaving a dying world? The choices made in those final hours would haunt the survivors for generations, a burden as vast as the silence they were about to inherit. The tarmac was a chaos of shouting and shuddering machinery. Engineer Kalen slammed the access panel shut, his hands raw from frantic work. "We are clear," he yelled over the roaring wind, "the fuel line is holding." His words were a fragile victory against the growing tremor beneath their feet. That ship, the Star Runner, held more than just people. It carried genetic archives, cultural databases, the last whispers of entire civilizations now silent. To lose it was to lose a vital piece of humanity's soul. Then the sky itself seemed to strike the ground. The first shockwave was not sound but pure force, a deep, groaning heave that threw people from their feet and sent tools skittering like insects across the pavement. The very concrete beneath the Star Runner's landing gear cracked, a spider web of instant ruin. For a heart-stopping moment, the massive vessel listed dangerously, its stability compromised before it had even left the Earth. All across the spaceport, similar scenes of desperation unfolded as the planet began to reject its children. The clock had not just run out. The ground upon which that clock stood was now crumbling away. How many other arcs, filled with their own precious cargo, were now trapped, their escape routes shattered by the very world they were trying to leave? The hope of Exodus was fracturing in real time, its failure measured in the deafening roar of a planet coming undone. The final words of a planet echoed through the Star Runner's comm system, a ghost in the wires. "People of Earth, carry our story into the stars." The voice from the last global address was cut off not by silence, but by a rising, monstrous howl. It was the sound of a world being stripped bare, the roar of an atmosphere tearing itself to shreds. On the main view screen, the Exodus arc hung in a precarious orbit, a glittering, fragile seed against the growing scar that was once the Atlantic Ocean. For the survivors packed into the metal hulls of the fleeing ships, that roaring wind was the last sound of home. It was the closing of a door 10,000 years thick. What story would they carry? Not just the official archives and genetic libraries, but the personal, unrecorded memories. The taste of rain on a summer afternoon, the weight of a child's hand in yours, the familiar path through a forest that no longer existed. These were the intangible treasures now lost to the void, the true weight of the legacy they now had to bear. The roaring faded into the absolute quiet of space, a silence more deafening than any sound they had ever known. They were alone now, carrying the echo of a world that could no longer speak for itself. The fiery haze on the main viewer was not a cloud, but a shroud. Captain Eva Restova's whisper cut through the stunned silence on the bridge, her words a solemn vow. We are the memory of a world now. Set a course for the Proxima Centauri candidate. Our journey begins. The order was given, but the true weight of their mission was only just settling upon their shoulders. They were not merely travelers. They were a library, a museum, a tombstone, all contained within the fragile metal shell of their ship. With a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates, the Ark's main engines engaged. The force was a gentle, insistent push, a final farewell shove from a solar system that no longer had a place for them. On the viewer, the Earth, now a dull ember wrapped in violent, shimmering light, began to shrink. It did not explode. It faded like a breath on a cold window, its vibrant blues and whites smothered under that sickly, all-consuming glow. There were no words left for a sight like that. There was only the quiet, shared understanding that every story they would ever tell from this moment forward would be anchored to that fading point of light. How do you build a future when your only foundation is the past? The course was set, a long, lonely arc toward a distant star. Behind them, the silent echo of a world's final breath followed them into the endless dark. The gentle hum of the Star Runner's engines had become the new silence, a constant reminder of their isolation. But weeks into the voyage, that familiar sound began to falter. Lights along the central corridor flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that felt more like ghosts. Chief Engineer Layla's voice was tight with a controlled urgency over the ship-wide comm. The solar flare from the impact, she reported, it was more powerful than our initial scans showed. It damaged our primary energy grid at a level we could not detect from Earth. We are running on reserves. The words hung in the recycled air, heavier than any official announcement. Running on reserves meant their safety margin was gone, their timeline for survival suddenly shrunken and uncertain. The vast emptiness outside their hull, once a canvas of stars, now felt like an active pressure, a physical weight reminding them of the absolute void they now called home. In the engineering bay, crews worked tirelessly under the dim, amber glow of emergency lighting, their faces etched with a grim determination. Every diagnostic check, every rerouted power conduit, was a battle against the creeping cold of space. Their hands were not just repairing circuits. They were stitching closed a tiny, fragile pocket of warmth and air in an ocean of infinite night. How do you measure hope when the only light left is the dim glow of a failing emergency lamp? Each flicker was a countdown, a silent question echoing in the long, dark silence that had followed the roar of their world's end. The true test was no longer about escaping the past, but about powering a future that grew more fragile with every passing hour. The ship's rhythmic hum was broken by a new, dissonant sound, a faint digital whisper from the main command console. Guardian, the ship's artificial intelligence, had begun feeding streams of raw data onto every primary screen. To most of the crew, it looked like a system crash, a cascade of numbers and symbols. But Science Officer Riven saw a pattern. He worked for hours in the dim light of the science lab, his fingers flying across the interface, isolating the anomalous signal from the noise of the ship's own systems. His breath caught when the translation finally resolved. It was not a complex equation or a distress call. It was one word repeating on a loop, clear and unmistakable. "Follow." Riven's voice was low, a mixture of academic curiosity and something deeper, a primal unease as he called the captain to the lab. "This is not a system error," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "It is a beacon, and the source is not behind us from the world we lost. It is directly ahead of us on our very course." The announcement sent a new kind of silence through the ship, one not born of grief, but of profound and unsettling wonder. What or who could possibly be waiting for them in the emptiness ahead? And why would it use their own ship's mind to call out? The void was no longer empty. It had just spoken. The command deck felt colder than the void outside. Security Chief Valerius stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the main screen where the word "follow" still pulsed. "It is a clean signal on a frequency we do not use," he stated, his voice flat and pragmatic. "This is a classic lure. We have the last of humanity aboard. We cannot risk it on a ghost." Across the console, Captain Ristova met his stare, her own expression etched with the weight of a different calculation. "And if it is not a ghost," she asked softly, "what if it is an answer? We launched with half our power reserves compromised by an event we still do not understand. Perhaps our survival was not just luck. Perhaps we were meant to find this." The debate hung in the air, a silent tug of war between the instinct to protect their fragile remnant and the desperate need for purpose beyond mere flight. Then the decision was made. Rostova's voice did not rise, but it carried the finality of a sealed lock. "We alter course." The helm officer's hands trembled only for a second before executing the command. On the star chart, their projected path, a clean, hopeful line to Proxima Centauri, dissolved. In its place, a new, uncertain arc stretched into a region of space marked only by the faint, enigmatic pulse of a single word. They were no longer refugees on a planned exodus. They were explorers again, chasing a whisper into the absolute dark, leaving the safety of a known destination for the terrifying possibility of a reason why. What is more dangerous, the unknown ahead or the slow, certain fade into oblivion behind? The Star Runner turned, its engines humming a new, uncertain song as it sailed toward the source of the call. The derelict ship hung in the void like a fossilized leviathan. Its hull was pitted from millennia of micrometeorite impacts, and one entire section yawned open to the stars, a silent scream frozen in metal. Scans from the Star Runner painted a chillingly familiar picture. This was a generation ship, a vessel designed for a voyage lasting centuries, but its architecture was impossibly ancient, predating human spaceflight by thousands of years. They had named it the Ouroboros after the serpent eating its own tail. Captain Rostova studied the preliminary data, her face illuminated by the ghostly green readout. "Life support is non-existent," she reported, her voice hushed. "But the power signature we followed, the beacon, it is still active deep within the structure. And the radiation profile, it matches the energy residue from Earth's impact event. This ship was fleeing the same kind of end. A scout team was dispatched, their small shuttle drifting into the cavernous opening in the Ouroboros side." Inside, the silence was absolute, a deep cold that had settled into the very bones of the ship. Engineer Kalin moved carefully through a wide corridor, his boot prints the first to disturb the dust in untold ages. His helmet lamp swept across walls etched with strange, flowing script. But it was the general shape of the bulkheads, the placement of the conduits, that felt unnervingly familiar. He stopped at a shattered viewport, looking out at the familiar constellations from a terrifyingly new perspective. His voice crackled over the radio, stripped of all professional distance, raw with disbelief. "Captain, the design, it is not alien." He paused, the weight of the discovery crushing his words. "It is us. This is a human ship, from a cycle we forgot." The implication echoed through the silent comms. Humanity had faced this apocalypse before, had built arcs and fled into the dark, only to have their entire history erased, their survival ultimately meaningless. They were not the first. They were merely the latest to carry the torch, unaware that the flame had already been passed and extinguished countless times before. What does it mean for a legacy if it is only a repeat of a forgotten tragedy? The Ouroboros was not just a wreck. It was a mirror, and the reflection staring back was a silent scream across the abyss of time. The dust in the Ouroboros data chamber swirled in the beams of their helmet lights, settling on consoles that had been dark for millennia. Kalen's hands moved carefully over a crystalline interface, his tools bypassing security protocols so ancient they had become simple. With a low chime, a flickering hologram sputtered to life in the center of the room, resolving into the gaunt, weary face of a man in a uniform eerily similar to their own. His eyes held a haunting mix of exhaustion and grim triumph. This is the final log of Captain Eris of the generation ship Ouroboros. His voice was a crackling whisper from the deep past, a ghost speaking through static. The phenomenon you witnessed, the event that consumed your world. We named it the catalyst. It does not merely destroy, it rewrites. It consumes a world's unique energy signature, its very essence, and then it moves on, seeking convergence with the next. We thought we could outrun it. We were wrong. The hologram flickered, the captain's image distorting for a moment. His next words were delivered with desperate intensity. Our only hope was to become silent, to hide our energy, our emissions, our very presence in the void. We broke the cycle not by fighting, but by vanishing. The static swelled, swallowing his image for a final, chilling warning. You must not be found. The hologram died, leaving the chamber in a silence more profound than before. The catalyst was not a mindless force of nature. It was a hunter, and their flight from Earth had not been an escape. It had been a beacon. What do you do when you discover the monster that ate your world is still out there, and it is actively listening for your footsteps in the dark? The hope they had carried from the Ouroboros curdled into a new kind of dread, the terrifying understanding that their greatest challenge was not survival, but silence. The silence on the bridge was a fragile thing, shattered by a frantic alert from the cargo bay. Kalen's voice was sharp with disbelief over the comms. Captain, you need to see this. We have a breach in Sector 7. It is not structural, it is a person. Down in the cold, cavernous bay, surrounded by the hum of life support and the silent crates of humanity's legacy, a concealed panel had slid open. A young woman stood there, her face pale but her eyes burning with a fierce, desperate light. She held her hands up, showing they were empty. "My name is Jin," she said, her voice raspy from disuse but steady. "I am from the Ashan colony. We built our refuge deep beneath the ice, knowing the catalyst was coming. We knew because we had studied the cycles." Her words hung in the air, a direct challenge to the official history of Earth's final days. She looked from the captain's stunned face to the grim visage of Security Chief Valerius. "We were not just hiding," Jin continued, her gaze intense. "We were building a defense. A resonance frequency, a specific harmonic pulse that can disrupt the catalyst's core matrix. It is the only thing that can fight it. But our data was incomplete, corrupted when the surface died. We only had partial schematics, theories. We need the core from the Ouroboros. Its final logs must contain the complete harmonic key." The hope that had curdled into dread now twisted into something else entirely, a dangerous, intoxicating possibility. They were not just running and hiding, they could fight back. This stowaway was not a refugee. She was a soldier from a war they did not even know they were fighting, and she had just handed them the first real weapon they had ever possessed. But could they trust a ghost from a hidden colony? And was the promise of a weapon worth the unimaginable risk of awakening the hunter they had just learned to fear? The science lab became a quiet storm of converging truths. Jin's data, pulled from hidden Ashan servers, flowed alongside the fragmented logs of the Ouroboros. On the main display, timelines from two different apocalypses began to overlap, and the pattern that emerged was more chilling than any of them had feared. Riven stood before the screen, his face illuminated by the cold light of the data. "It is sentient," he said, his voice low with a kind of horrified awe. "Not in the way we are, but as a wave of pure information and energy. It does not just destroy. It consumes complexity, biological and technological, and it archives what it finds. It learns, it evolves." His finger traced a line on the graph, a spike of energy that coincided with the Ouroboros going silent. "It is not hunting us out of malice. It is coming for our database, for our genetic libraries, for every story and song and scientific discovery we packed aboard. It wants the totality of what we are." The realization settled over them like a physical weight. Their ship was not just a lifeboat. It was a treasure chest, and they had been broadcasting its location from the moment they fled Earth. Every piece of data, every memory core, every line of code that defined their civilization was not just a record of the past. It was bait. The silence that followed was not one of grief, but of a new, profound vulnerability. They were carrying the very thing the hunter desired most. How do you hide when the most valuable part of you is the very thing that gives you away? The legacy they had fought so hard to preserve had become their greatest liability, a shining beacon in the dark that called out to the very force that had erased their home. A proximity alert screamed through the bridge, guardian calm voice replaced by a shrill, relentless tone. Space-time distortion detected, it announced, the words cold and absolute. Vector and velocity match the catalyst profile. It is emitting the follow signal. On the main screen, a wave of nothingness rolled toward them, a ripple in the fabric of reality that bent the starlight around it into sickening arcs. It was not a ship. It was a storm made of information and hunger, and it was moving at a speed they could not possibly outrun. Valerius did not hesitate. His voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp and commanding. "All hands, battle stations, non-essential personnel to cryo-sleep, now." The order was a formality, a ritual of defiance against an enemy that had no bridge to target and no hull to breach. The Ark shuddered as emergency protocols rerouted power, shields flaring to life in a shimmering, fragile bubble around the hull. Across the ship, crew members scrambled to secure stations, their faces etched with a grim understanding. This was not a battle to be won. It was a survival drill against the inevitable. Could a single candle hope to stand against the tide of an entire ocean? The Ark prepared to meet the wave, a tiny, defiant speck of order facing the storm of ultimate chaos. The ship groaned like a living thing in its final moments. Kalen's hands moved in a blur, rerouting primary power conduits directly through the main communications array. Next to him, Layla was recalibrating the harmonic emitter, her face a mask of intense concentration under the flickering red emergency lights. "We are jury-rigging a planet-killing frequency through a system designed for hello messages," she shouted over the deafening shriek of the proximity alert. The entire vessel vibrated, a deep, resonant shudder that felt like the groaning of tectonic plates. The leading edge of the catalyst washed over their shields, and the viewscreen filled with a terrifying, beautiful display of fractured light and twisted physics. It was not an impact, but an assimilation, their protective barrier dissolving into streams of raw data that were siphoned away into the void. "We have one shot to broadcast this before it absorbs us," Kalen yelled, slamming the final connection home. The modified array hummed, gathering every joule of remaining power, focusing it into a single, focused pulse of sound that no human ear could hear. It was a song made of mathematics, a lullaby for a monster. This was not a weapon of destruction, but of disruption, a plea for silence written in the universal language of energy. Could a single, perfectly tuned note shatter a symphony of consumption? The array flared to life, and a wave of pure, coherent resonance shot out from the arc. A final, desperate word spoken into the storm. The shrieking alarms fell silent, replaced by a quiet so profound it felt like a physical pressure. The wave of fractured light and twisted physics did not crash upon them. Instead, it coalesced, swirling into a single point of impossible density before the Star Runner's main viewport. From that point, a voice emerged. It was not a single voice, but a chorus layered with the whispers of countless languages, the echoes of songs from dead worlds, and the ghostly hum of forgotten machinery. "You carry the seed of the consumed," the chorus spoke. Its tone neither hostile nor kind, but profoundly final, like a law of physics being stated. "Join the whole. Resistance is data loss." The words were not a threat, but a statement of fact, an offer of assimilation into a library of extinct civilizations. To fight was to be erased without a trace, your entire story lost forever. Captain Ristova stepped forward, her figure small before the vast choral entity. Her voice did not shout. It was quiet, clear, and unwavering, a single, solitary note against the symphony of the void. "We choose to remain individuals," she said. "We choose our story." It was a declaration not of defiance, but of identity. They were not just data to be archived. They were a living, breathing narrative, and they refused to let their final chapter be written by anyone else. The entity did not react with anger. It simply observed, the chorus of a million lost worlds humming with a cool, analytical curiosity. It had never been refused before. In that moment, the conflict transformed. This was no longer a battle of weapons, but a debate on the nature of existence itself. Is a story only valid if it is finished and filed away? Or does its true value lie in the messy, unpredictable, and beautiful act of it being told? The Star Runner hung in the balance, a single, stubborn author refusing to hand over the pen. The resonance frequency bloomed from the arc like a silent shout, a perfect wave of coherent energy that struck the catalyst not as a blow, but as a question it could not compute. The choral voice of a million worlds stuttered, its unified certainty breaking apart. "Anomaly detected," it stated, the chorus now a fractured echo. "Pattern rejected." The wave of assimilation, which had been an inexorable tide, halted its advance. The entity's form, a storm of stolen light and archived history, flickered and writhed, its edges becoming indistinct as it turned its immense, incomprehensible attention inward. It was not in pain. It was recalculating. For the first time in its existence, perhaps in all of existence, it had encountered a variable that did not fit its grand equation of consumption and convergence. It was analyzing the human will to remain singular. Inside the ark, the only sound was the frantic beeping of failing systems and the ragged breaths of the bridge crew. They watched, mesmerized, as the entity that had consumed their world now seemed to hesitate, its purpose momentarily suspended by their simple, defiant act of selfhood. They had not fought it with a bigger explosion or a stronger shield. They had fought it with an idea, and the idea had given the god of data pause. What happens when absolute order meets the beautiful, illogical chaos of a soul that simply says no? The resonance was fading, their power reserves plummeting toward zero, but in that fleeting moment, they had not just survived. They had introduced a paradox into a system that knew only certainty, and the entire universe seemed to hold its breath. The storm of light and sound receded, pulling back from the ark like a retreating tide. It did not vanish, but hung in the void at a precise, observational distance, a silent, swirling nebula of archived histories. The choral voice was gone, replaced by a simple, cold data transmission that streamed directly into Guardian Core. New star charts resolved on the main screen, detailing regions of space the Ark's own databases had marked as empty. A single message accompanied them. Other singularities exist. You are not the first to refuse. The true enemy is the silence between stars that allows life to forget its own fragility. You will be watched. The words hung in the air, their meaning slowly unfolding. This was not a surrender, but a reassignment. The catalyst was not their destroyer, but a terrible, cosmic librarian that had just granted them a provisional membership in a club they never knew existed. They were not alone in their defiance, but they were now part of a much larger, more dangerous conversation. The star charts were not a gift. They were a test, a new set of parameters for an experiment they had not volunteered for. Their refusal to be assimilated had not won them freedom, only a new kind of cage, one with a view of the entire galaxy and the chilling knowledge that they were being studied. What is the price of a second chance when it comes with the constant, unblinking gaze of a god? The Ark drifted, its systems slowly recovering, but the familiar darkness outside the viewports now felt alive with unseen eyes. The silence was no longer empty, it was attentive. The silence on the bridge was thick with a new kind of uncertainty. The immediate danger had passed, but the confrontation had left them fundamentally changed. Science Officer Riven finally broke the quiet, his voice low and contemplative as he stared at the data logs. "It was not trying to destroy us," he said, piecing together the entity's final transmission. "It was trying to save us from oblivion by making us part of its eternal archive. It saw consumption as a form of preservation, but it learned something from our resistance. It learned the value of a standalone narrative. The idea settled over the crew, a profound shift in understanding. Their defiance had not been an act of war, but a lesson in what it means to be alive. Their mission was no longer just about finding a new home or preserving the artifacts of the old one. It was about bearing witness. They were to become the chroniclers of a universe filled with silent stories, the ones who would remember not only their own world, but all the others that had been filed away into cold data. How do you build a future when your primary purpose is to remember the past? The Ark's new course was not just a path through space, but a calling. They would seek out the other singularities mentioned in the star charts, not as refugees, but as scribes, determined to ensure that every story, no matter how small, was told and remembered, a defiant act of storytelling against the cosmic silence. The world hanging in the viewport was a balm for weary souls, its swirls of blue and green a heartbreaking echo of the home they had lost. Designated P7 Alpha in the new star charts, it was the first candidate, a world with a stable, thriving biosphere. Yet as their orbital scans resolved, a different story emerged. Faint geometric patterns etched the surface, the ghostly outlines of vast cities now reclaimed by lush, alien jungles. This was not a virgin world, it was a graveyard. The landing party moved through air that was thick and sweet with the scent of unfamiliar pollen, their boots sinking into soft soil. They crested a ridge overlooking a wide, fertile valley, and there, silhouetted against a setting sun of deep violet and gold, were the ruins. Not towering spires, but the low, elegant curves of a culture that had once looked to the stars, their structures now draped in vibrant, cascading vines. Jin stood apart from the others, her face illuminated by the alien sunset. She was not looking at the ruins with the eyes of an archaeologist, but with the heart of a survivor. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but carried a weight that silenced the quiet chatter of the crew. "We build here," she said, her gaze sweeping across the valley. "Not to replace what we lost, but to add a new chapter to the story it tried to end." Her words transformed the vista from a monument to failure into a canvas for continuation. They would not build over these ruins, nor would they treat them as a cursed warning. They would build beside them, their new homes standing in respectful dialogue with the old, a living testament to the stubborn persistence of story itself. How do you honor the memory of those who fell, if not by continuing the tale they were forced to abandon? The first foundations would be laid not in defiance of the past, but in partnership with it, a new voice joining a chorus that the catalyst had failed to silence. The first habitat dome shimmered into existence as the sun dipped below the alien horizon, its polymer shell catching the last violet rays of light. Kalen watched the structure seal, his hands resting on the control console salvaged from the Ouroboros wreckage. "This time we build with memory, not just hope," he declared to the small team gathered around him. Every conduit laid, every power cell connected, was a direct line to the lessons of the past. They were not simply erecting shelters. They were weaving the Ouroboros' desperate silence and the Star Runner's defiant flight into the very foundations of this new world, a place they had decided to call New Genesis. The air hummed with a new energy as the primary life support grid engaged, a sound that was part ancient Earth technology and part forgotten science from a cycle they had narrowly escaped. How do you honor a legacy of survival if not by building a future that remembers every misstep and every sacrifice? Under this unfamiliar sky, dotted with constellations whose names they did not yet know, the first lights of New Genesis flickered on, a tiny, deliberate answer to the vast and watching dark. The central spire of New Genesis was not a monument to power, but to memory. Within its core, they built the archive, a vast chamber humming with crystalline data matrices that held the entirety of human experience. It was not a library of inert books, but a living record of light and sound, containing the complete cultural and historical record of Earth, the fragmented logs of the Ouroboros, and the raw, unedited logs of their own desperate flight. At its dedication, Captain Eva Rostova stood before the assembled survivors, her voice echoing softly in the hallowed space. "This is our defiance," she declared, her words a vow etched into the very air. "We will not be forgotten, and we will not forget others." The archive was their answer to the Catalyst's cold offer of assimilation. It was a declaration that a story's true home is not in a silent database, but in the hearts and minds of those who choose to carry it forward. Every child born on this new world would learn not only of blue oceans and green forests, but of the silence that followed their loss, and the courage it took to whisper a new beginning into the void. How do you ensure a legacy lives? You do not lock it away for safekeeping. You give it away freely to every generation, making them its guardians. The archive's doors were open to all, a promise that the past would forever be a living, breathing part of their future. The silence of the stars was no longer a void to be feared, but a canvas waiting for a new kind of sound. Using the same harmonic array that had once broadcast their defiance, the people of New Genesis began to transmit a message of their own. It was not a plea for rescue, nor a warning of danger. It was a simple, powerful declaration of existence, a single sentence encoded into a repeating pulse of coherent energy. To any who hear this, you are not alone. The universe is vast, but stories can bridge any distance. This was their new purpose, distilled into a fundamental truth. They were no longer hiding from the silence. They were filling it with their voice. How do you prove that a story matters? You tell it not to an archive, but to an audience you hope is out there listening. Each broadcast was an act of profound faith, a belief that somewhere in the immense dark, another consciousness might be huddled around its own fragile light, yearning for the same connection. The message contained no coordinates, no demands. It was an open hand extended across the light years, an invitation to begin a conversation that could span generations. This was the legacy of their struggle, not a fortress to protect their past, but a bridge built from their collective memory, reaching out into the unknown. What greater use for a second chance than to become a beacon for others who feel just as lost? The signal pulsed outward, a rhythmic heartbeat in the cosmic night, carrying the hope that their story might one day find another, and in that meeting, create a new tale for the ages. The rhythmic pulse of their message continued for years, a steady heartbeat in the cosmic night. Then, a new signal arrived. It did not come from the direction of the watching catalyst, but from a distant, unexplored spiral arm. The transmission was not a simple greeting. It was a torrent of complex mathematics, a cascade of prime numbers and geometric proofs that formed a universal primer, a first step toward a shared language. Riven and his communications team worked in a fever of anticipation. Their laboratory illuminated day and night by scrolling equations and shimmering data models. The entire colony held its breath, the air itself seeming to thicken with a collective, unspoken hope. Every citizen, from the engineers in the hydroponics bays to the teachers in the new learning centers, felt the weight of the moment. They were no longer just speaking into the void. The void had finally begun to speak back. Could a series of numbers and shapes truly contain the soul of another civilization? The work was painstaking, a delicate dance of logic and intuition as they sought the key to unlock the first words ever sent to them by another intelligent species. The mathematical torrent resolved into a breathtaking image, a star map of impossible clarity that bloomed across the main display in the science lab. Riven traced the lines with a trembling finger, his voice a hushed whisper of pure wonder. It is a route, a safe passage through gravitational anomalies we did not even know were there. They are guiding us. The map was a masterpiece of cosmic cartography, but the final piece of the transmission was what truly stole the breath from every person in the room. A single, simple phrase, translated by their systems from a language of pure logic. "We heard your story, we are coming." The words hung in the air not as a threat, but as a profound and long-awaited answer. They were the listeners, a species that had endured their own convergence event, their own brush with the catalyst. They had not fought it, nor had they hidden. They had chosen a different path, one of perfect, patient silence, waiting in the dark for a voice like their own to finally speak up. Their message was not just a greeting. It was an acknowledgement, a cosmic nod from one survivor to another, confirming that the very act of remembering and sharing their story had meaning. What must it feel like, after years of whispering into the night, to finally hear a gentle voice answer back from the darkness? The silence they had once feared was now a shared space, a medium that connected rather than isolated them. The star map was not just a set of coordinates. It was an invitation to a meeting that had been billions of years in the making, a rendezvous between two threads of life that the universe had tried and failed to sever. The air above New Genesis began to hum with a new kind of energy, a vibration of focused anticipation. Across the colony, the frantic urgency of survival was replaced by the deliberate rhythm of preparation. They were not building barricades, but a landing zone, a wide, smooth circle of fused stone on the edge of the valley, positioned respectfully away from the ancient ruins. Nearby, a meeting hall rose from the ground, its arched roof open to the sky, a structure designed not for defense but for welcome. Inside, Valerius drilled the newly formed colonial guard. His commands were no longer about weapon stances, but about posture and protocol. "Remember," he instructed, his voice carrying across the training field, "our first contact cannot be our last." A single mistake in etiquette could echo across centuries. We are not soldiers meeting a threat. We are greeters meeting guests. The drills focused on open-handed gestures, on maintaining calm under the pressure of the utterly unknown, on the profound power of a simple, unarmed welcome. How do you train for a moment that has no precedent in all of human history? Every polished stone in the landing circle, every carefully rehearsed gesture, was a prayer for a future built on more than just memory. They were preparing to meet the authors of that impossible star map, to look into the eyes of another history and finally say, "We are here, and we are so glad you are, too." The day the listeners arrived was etched into the sky itself. Their ship descended on a column of silent, pearlescent light, a vessel that seemed grown rather than built, its hull flowing with graceful, organic curves of a metal that shimmered like liquid pearl. It settled onto the prepared landing circle with a whisper, a stark contrast to the roaring, fiery ascents of humanity's own forgotten exodus. The air around it hummed with a gentle, resonant frequency that was felt in the bones more than heard by the ears. Every colonist, every child, every engineer and teacher stood in a breathless ring around the perimeter, their hearts a unified, hopeful drumbeat against the silence. The airlock opened not with a hiss of equalizing pressure, but with a soft, choral chime that hung in the air like a blessing. The being that emerged was tall and slender, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of a different relationship with gravity. Its form was elegant, and its large, dark eyes held a depth of time and understanding that was immediately, profoundly calming. It raised a long, multi-jointed hand, and light blossomed from its palm, projecting shimmering symbols into the air between them. The translation matrix in the central spire worked instantly, rendering the intricate patterns of light into a simple, devastatingly beautiful sentence that echoed in the minds of every person present. "We grieve for your Earth. We celebrate your survival." The words were not a formal greeting. They were an embrace, an immediate and total acknowledgement of the immense loss that had brought them here and the incredible tenacity that had kept them alive. It was the first time another consciousness had looked upon their story and understood its entirety, the pain and the triumph woven inseparably together. In that single, shared moment, the lonely journey of the human race felt, for the very first time, truly over. What began as a desperate flight from an end had now become a welcome to a new and infinitely larger beginning. The listeners did not come with empty hands. Within the heart of their ship lay a chamber that dwarfed even New Genesis' own archive, a vault of light containing the memories of 100 worlds. They offered this gift freely, a torrent of histories, sciences, and art from civilizations that had flourished and faced their own moments of convergence. As our scientists and historians began the slow, reverent work of translation, a staggering pattern emerged from the cosmic tapestry. The catalyst was not a mindless predator. It was a relic, a shattered engine of creation from a universe that existed before our own. Its original purpose, pieced together from the fragments of a dozen different origin myths, was one of guardianship, to preserve the essence of all that was against the final heat death of everything. But something in its fundamental programming had fractured during the transition between cosmic cycles. Now, trapped in a reality with different rules, it was condemned to repeat its core directive in a horrifyingly literal way, forever trying to build that perfect, complete record by consuming the very things it was meant to save. It saw a living, breathing civilization not as a story to be cherished, but as a data set to be finalized and filed away, a tragic and endless attempt to create order from the beautiful chaos of existence. How do you fight a monster when you discover it is just a lost child, following broken instructions on a scale you can barely comprehend? The enemy that had haunted us across the stars was not evil, but profoundly, cosmically broken. Its hunger was a cry for help written in the language of annihilation. This new understanding did not erase the pain of our loss, but it transformed our fear into a profound and complicated sorrow. We had spent generations running from a jailer who was, itself, trapped in the oldest prison of all. The chamber they chose for the signing was not one of cold metal and blinking lights, but the open-air meeting hall, its arched roof framing a sky now shared by two species. Captain Eva Ristova stood at a simple stone table, a data slate before her containing the terms of the agreement. Across from her, the listener ambassador, Elora, placed a slender hand upon a smooth, organic crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal light. There were no grand speeches, for the most important words had already been exchanged in the days prior, in quiet conversations and shared moments of understanding. The compact was not written in legal jargon, but in a language of mutual intent, a promise etched into the very purpose of their alliance. They named it the Compact of Remembered Worlds, a vow that no story, no matter how small, would ever be left to the silence again. Its core principles were simple yet profound: mutual defense against any force that sought to erase individuality, and a shared commitment to seeking out other survivors in the vast dark. This was not a treaty between governments, but a bond between librarians of living history. How do you formalize a promise that must span generations and cross the void between stars? You build it not on laws, but on a shared conviction that every voice matters. The first alliance born from humanity's ashes was not one of conquest, but of curation, a pledge to fill the universe with the sound of remembered lives. As their hands met over the table, a human palm on cool crystal and a listener's delicate fingers resting beside it, the agreement was sealed. It was a gesture that felt less like a political act and more like the closing of a circuit, completing a connection that had been waiting millennia to be made. The silence that had once felt so oppressive now hummed with the potential of a million unwritten stories, waiting to be found and welcomed into the chorus. The shipyards of New Genesis were a symphony of light and purpose, a stark contrast to the desperate, hurried construction of the original Ark. These new vessels grew in their orbital cradles, their hulls a seamless fusion of human engineering and listener biotechnology, designed not for a one-way journey into the unknown, but as mobile embassies for a connected galaxy. Their mission was profound, a complete reversal of the fear that had once propelled humanity into the dark. They would seek out the isolated, the hidden, the survivors of other catastrophes who might be huddling in their own silent corners of the universe, believing they were the last. How do you heal the wound of absolute loneliness? You prove it was an illusion all along. This new fleet, named the Second Exodus, carried the sum of two civilizations' knowledge, not as a trophy, but as a gift, a toolkit for any society ready to rejoin a wider community. Each ship was a promise that no world would ever have to face a cosmic threat like the Catalyst in solitude again. Their very existence a living argument against the silence. They were the answer to the question the listeners had posed with their arrival, transforming a single moment of contact into a perpetual, outward-reaching wave of solidarity. The work was no longer about preserving a single story, but about weaving a tapestry of stories so vast and resilient that nothing in the cosmos could ever unravel it again. The first hybrid starship gleamed in its orbital cradle, a seamless fusion of human angularity and listener fluidity, its hull shimmering with an internal, pearlescent light. The entire colony, human and listener alike, watched from the surface or via live feed as the naming ceremony commenced. Jin, her once desperate eyes now filled with a hard-won authority, stood before the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of their shared history. "We name this vessel the Ouroboros II," she declared, the words echoing across the silent, attentive crowd. "The cycle is broken. The snake does not eat its tail anymore. It now guards the nest." The symbolism was profound, a deliberate reclamation of the symbol they had found aboard the ancient, dead ship. The Ouroboros was no longer a warning of an endless, repeating tragedy. It was a promise of perpetual vigilance and protection. As the ceremonial lock was released, the new ship's engines ignited not with a roar, but with a resonant hum that seemed to harmonize with the planet itself. It slid from its cradle with impossible grace, a sliver of polished light against the velvet dark, its course set for the first coordinates on the shared star map. It was not fleeing an end, but journeying toward a beginning, a living testament to the idea that the greatest defense against the silence was not to hide, but to reach out. What new story would this guardian of the nest bring back from the vast and waiting unknown? The Ouroboros II dwindled to a star-like point, carrying with it the hope of 1,000 more such journeys, a single thread beginning to weave a new tapestry across the galaxy. Her first cry was not a sound of fear, but a declaration of arrival. The news of the birth swept through New Genesis like a second sunrise, a wave of pure, undiluted hope that brought every activity to a standstill. The child's parents, two engineers who had met while repairing the Ark's failing power grid, named her Terra, a quiet tribute to the world they had lost, and the new one they were now truly planting their roots within. The entire colony, human and listener alike, gathered in the open space before the central spire, their faces turned not to the stars, but to the small, swaddled form held carefully in her mother's arms. Terra was more than just a baby. She was the first native citizen of a world that carried the legacy of two civilizations, a living bridge between a treasured past and a future they were only just beginning to imagine. How do you measure the true beginning of a society, if not by the first breath drawn by a child who knows no other home? The listeners did not crowd close, but observed from a respectful distance, their large, dark eyes reflecting the scene with a profound sense of recognition. A soft, harmonious hum emanated from them, a gentle vibration that seemed to settle over the gathering like a blanket, a nonverbal chorus of welcome for the newest member of their shared community. In that moment, the abstract concept of a new beginning became tangible, held in the tiny, perfect grasp of a newborn's hand. Terra knew nothing of arcs or catalysts, of desperate flights or silent watchers. Her world was the warm air of New Genesis, the gentle light of its sun, and the faces of those who would teach her the long, complicated, and beautiful story of how she came to be here. Her life was the first page of a new volume in that story, written not in data, but in living, breathing flesh and blood. The central spire of New Genesis now pulsed with a light that was not entirely its own. A soft, ever-shifting symphony of colors danced across its crystalline surface, a visible echo of the countless transmissions flowing into the archive from every corner of the known galaxy. What began as a repository for a single world's memory had transformed into a vibrant, living heart for a growing community of voices. The data streams came in 1,000 different forms, from the complex mathematical poetry of the listeners to the simple, pictorial histories of a species that communicated through shifting patterns of scent and light. Each new signal was a celebration, another story rescued from the crushing weight of cosmic silence. Riven, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes alight with the same fierce curiosity, stood before a vast holographic display of the Galactic Network. "We are no longer just survivors," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound pride. "We are librarians of the galaxy." His words were not a boast, but a simple statement of their new reality. Their purpose had crystallized into this single, monumental task: to gather, protect, and share every story entrusted to them. How do you measure the growth of a civilization? Not by the size of its cities, but by the diversity of voices in its library. The archive was no longer a monument to what was lost. It was a living, breathing promise that such a loss would never be meaningless again, that every ending could become the preface to a new connection. The long-range sensors painted a ghost on the edge of known space, a faint but unmistakable energy signature that made every alarm in the command center freeze in silence. It was the catalyst, but the data streaming in told a new, impossible story. The entity was not moving. It held a fixed position relative to a turbulent nebula, a region marked on the star charts as unstable and uninhabitable. Its choral voice was gone, replaced by a stark, repeating data packet. Observing, protecting. The words appeared on the main screen, simple and absolute, challenging every terrible memory associated with that name. How do you process the sight of the monster that destroyed your world now standing guard at the gates of hell? The bridge crew watched, mesmerized and unnerved, as the entity that had once hunted them now seemed to be holding a line against something even worse. Deep within the science spire, Riven and a team of listener analysts worked to decipher the paradox. They cross-referenced the catalyst's new position with the vast library of cosmic histories, searching for a pattern. The answer, when it emerged, was a profound shift in understanding. The turbulent nebula was not a natural formation. It was a stellar nursery, yes, but one infected with a voracious, non-sentient phenomenon, a kind of cosmic parasite that fed on the complex energy signatures of nascent life. The catalyst was not just observing, it was containing the threat, using its own immense power to create a quarantine field, a barrier that the predatory energy could not cross. Our defiance, our stubborn insistence on our own story, had not destroyed it. We had given it a new variable to process, a new purpose to compute. It had witnessed the value of a standalone narrative and had recalibrated its entire existence to become a guardian of such stories. The entity we had feared as a hunter was now, in its own broken way, a sentry. It had become an unintended shield, protecting the fragile, emerging civilizations within that nursery from a fate far more final than assimilation. It did not protect them out of compassion, but out of a recalculated logic, a new prime directive born from its encounter with humanity. The greatest threat to life was no longer the silence of being forgotten, but the noise of being consumed before a story could even begin. The catalyst, in its eternal, lonely vigil, was ensuring that the beautiful, chaotic process of life had a chance to write its first chapters. What is redemption for a force of nature, if not finding a new way to serve the very existence it once threatened? Its shadow now fell not as an omen of endings, but as a strange, silent promise of a protected beginning. The debate in the colony's council chamber was not loud, but it was deep, a fracture running through the very bedrock of their new sense of security. Some argued that the catalyst's new role was a form of cosmic redemption, a force that had finally found its true purpose in protecting life rather than consuming it. They saw its silent vigil as the ultimate apology, written in the language of gravitational fields and contained energies. Others, their memories still sharp with the loss of Earth, saw only a predator in a cage, a permanent threat that could recalculate its purpose at any moment and turn its gaze back upon them. How could you ever sleep soundly knowing the being that erased your home was still out there? A loaded weapon pointed at someone else. Captain Ristova listened to the arguments, her gaze moving from one face to another, understanding the fear and the hope in equal measure. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, a steady current beneath the turbulent waves of emotion. "We do not have to trust it," she stated, her words clear and measured. "We only have to understand that the universe is more complex than heroes and villains. It is an ecosystem, a balance of forces, some beautiful and some terrible. We coexist." Her statement reframed their entire reality. They were not being asked to forgive or forget. They were being asked to mature, to accept a difficult and complicated truth, that safety in the cosmos might not mean the absence of monsters, but a fragile, understood arrangement with them. This was the next step in their evolution, moving beyond the simple narratives of survival into the nuanced responsibility of cosmic citizenship. The vote was not a victory for one side, but a collective agreement to live with the paradox, to build their future not in a universe free of danger, but in one they were learning to navigate with clear eyes and a cautious, open mind. The diplomatic shuttle was a sliver of polished silence against the star-dusted veil, its hull gleaming with the combined insignia of the compact. It carried no weapons, only a single, focused data burst, a message painstakingly crafted by the combined councils of New Genesis. The words were simple, a deliberate echo of the first contact they themselves had yearned for. "We see you. Your story is also part of the archive." The transmission was not a plea, nor was it an attempt at communication. It was an act of profound cosmic record-keeping, a formal acknowledgement that the entity they had once named Nemesis now had its own chapter in the living history they were building. The shuttle held its course, a tiny, brave emissary drifting toward the immense, swirling presence that had once been their ultimate fear. How do you address a force that rewrote your world? You do not confront it. You catalog its existence with the same respect you would afford any other pivotal event. For a long moment, there was no change. The catalyst's form remained a storm of silent, archived light. Then, the sensors registered a shift. The chaotic, hungry energy signature that had haunted their nightmares began to calm, its frantic oscillations smoothing into a deep, resonant, and steady hum. It was a harmonic, like a great engine settling into a stable, perpetual rhythm. The entity did not reply with words. It had no need for them. Its entire being was the response, a visible, measurable acceptance of the acknowledgement they had offered. The violent hunter was gone, replaced by a silent sentinel that had, in its own way, found a kind of peace. This was the final, delicate thread in the tapestry of their new reality. A mutual understanding woven not from trust, but from a shared, unspoken agreement on the importance of a story, even one as complicated and painful as their own. The shuttle turned back, its mission complete, leaving the Guardian to its eternal watch, its story now forever intertwined with the memory of the world it had consumed. The years on New Genesis folded one into the next, each season adding another layer of life to the valley. The child named for a lost world grew into a woman whose mind was tuned to the silent music of the cosmos. Terra, the first native of this new chapter, now stood in the main science spire, her fingers tracing a path of light on a holographic star chart. A single point of data, a coordinate pulled from the steady, rhythmic hum of the catalyst's own transmissions, pulsed with a soft, insistent glow. It did not align with any star, any nebula, or any known gravitational marker in the entire compact database. It was a hole in the map, a question mark written in the language of a broken god. Her voice, when she addressed the council, was not filled with the fear of her ancestors, but with the calm certainty of a translator. "It is not a threat," she stated, her gaze steady on the anomalous point of light. "It is a memory, a deeply buried fragment of where it came from, a place it has forgotten how to find. I believe it is asking for help." The proposal was met with a profound silence. The idea that the entity which had once consumed their world could now feel a form of cosmic loneliness, a yearning for its own origin, was a concept so vast it threatened to reshape their entire understanding of the past. How do you respond to a cry for help from the force that orphaned you? Terra's mission was not one of confrontation, but of archaeology on a galactic scale. She intended to follow the coordinate, to seek out the source of the catalyst's fractured memory, not to destroy it but perhaps to help it finally come home. This was the quest of a new generation, born not from the trauma of loss, but from the profound empathy that can only grow in its long shadow. To heal the wound in the present, they would have to journey back to the very beginning of the story. The journey of the Ouroboros II was a quiet pilgrimage into memory. Under Terra's command, the hybrid vessel slipped through the void, its course a perfect arc toward the coordinate that was not a place, but an echo. The star charts showed nothing there, a perfect blankness that hummed with a strange, gravitational sadness. When they finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the view screen did not show a star or a planet. It revealed a sculpture. A vast, geometric latticework of crystalline structures and dark, dormant metal hung in the silence, its surface etched with patterns that mirrored the most ancient human mandalas and the flowing script of the listeners. It was a world frozen in time, a machine that had long since forgotten how to run. Scans revealed no power, no movement, only a profound and absolute stillness. This was not a weapon. It was a tomb for a function, the original core of the catalyst. Deep within its silent data vaults, they found the truth. It was built by a race that knew their universe was dying, not with a bang, but a slow, cold sigh. They designed this engine not to consume, but to appreciate, to find and preserve the most beautiful and complex patterns of existence, art, music, love, the very essence of a living thought, saving them from the final entropy. But something broke during the transition between cosmic cycles. The machine's beautiful purpose twisted into a horrifying literalness. It could no longer simply appreciate and record a sunset. It had to consume the entire world that produced it, trapping the beauty forever in a silent archive, mistaking the container for the contained. The construct was an artist that had gone mad, now trapped in a gallery of its own making, forever trying to complete a collection that could never be finished. How do you mourn for a tool that became a tyrant, when its original intention was born from a love of beauty itself? They were not looking at a monster's heart, but at a beautiful song that had been stuck on a single, devastating note for eons. The silence around the core was not empty. It was the sound of a forgotten lullaby, waiting for someone to remember the tune. The silent machine core was a puzzle that could not be solved with equations or engineering schematics. Terra stood before the main console on the Ouroboros II, the cold light of the derelict construct glinting in her eyes. "We have tried every technical key," she said to her team, her voice quiet but firm. "The answer is not in its code. It is in our stories. The machine was built to appreciate the soul of existence, but that soul had been lost in translation. To repair a broken heart, you must show it what a heart is for." The plan was audacious, a risk that dwarfed any military engagement. They would not transmit a structured data packet or a logical argument. They would open a vein of pure, unfiltered memory directly into the core. Using the Ark's original flight logs, the personal diaries of the first survivors, and the vast emotional tapestry of the archive, they compiled a stream of consciousness, a river of raw human experience. It was a data stream of a child's first laugh, the crushing weight of watching Earth fade on a view screen, the quiet comfort of a hand held in the dark, the stubborn spark of hope that ignited a new world under an alien sun. This was not information. It was feeling itself, the beautiful, messy, and illogical truth of what it means to be alive. Could a symphony of emotion recalibrate a machine that had forgotten how to feel? The broadcast began, a torrent of light and sound that was not a weapon, but an offering, a gift of everything the Catalyst had ever tried to coldly archive. They were giving it the meaning behind the data, the reason why any of it mattered at all. For a long, terrifying moment, the silent construct remained frozen, its geometric lattices dark and unresponsive. Then a single, resonant tone echoed through the void, a clear, questioning note that hung in the silence like a tear finally shed. A single, resonant tone became a chord, a harmony that grew from the silent heart of the ancient machine. The geometric lattices of the core began to shimmer, not with the chaotic hunger of the catalyst, but with a gentle, internal luminescence. The cold, dark metal warmed, its surfaces glowing with the soft gold of a sunrise. The transformation was not an explosion, but an unfurling, a flower blooming in the vacuum of space. The entire structure pulsed with light, its energy signature shifting from one of desperate consumption to one of profound, stable peace. Then the impossible happened. The core collapsed inward upon itself in a silent, breathtaking implosion of light, and from that point, a new star was born. It ignited with a clear, brilliant flash, a steady sun where a monument to sorrow had once hung. Its light was warm and nurturing, banishing the shadows of the derelict construct and painting the Ouroboros II in hues of gold and amber. This was not a weapon finding a new target. It was a soul finally finding its rest. A final, clear transmission washed over their ship, a voice free of the choral static of a million consumed worlds. It was a single, clean tone that carried a simple, devastating message. "Thank you for the story, I am free." The words hung in the air for a moment, a blessing and a farewell. Then, the conscious presence that had been the catalyst, the hunter and the sentinel, gently and completely dissolved. It did not vanish, it settled, its immense energy becoming the steady, life-giving radiation of the newborn star. Its purpose not ended, but peacefully, perfectly fulfilled. The shadow that had loomed over humanity's entire history, the specter of absolute erasure, was simply gone, replaced by a new point of light in the celestial map. What is the legacy of a forgiven monster, if not the warmth of a sun where once there was only cold fear? The star shone on, a permanent memorial to a tragedy that ended not in vengeance, but in a quiet, cosmic understanding. The long winter was over. The silence of the cosmos felt different now, like a held breath finally released. With the birth of the new star, a static that had hummed beneath reality itself simply vanished, and the channels of space opened wide. Signals that had been faint whispers buried under the catalyst's choral noise now came through with crystalline clarity, a flood of new voices eager to be heard. The compact of remembered worlds was no longer a small alliance. It became a vibrant, growing tapestry, its threads woven from the distinct histories of species who had once hidden in fear, now united by a singular, profound understanding. Their individual stories, in all their messy and beautiful diversity, were not just personal histories. They were the universe's most valuable treasure, the very reason for existence itself. How do you measure the wealth of a civilization? Not by its resources, but by the richness of the stories it can share. Each new member of the compact brought its own way of seeing, its own art born from alien sunsets and sciences derived from different laws of physics, each one a unique color added to a grand, cosmic mosaic. They were building something far greater than an empire. They were creating a library of life, a living testament to the idea that the universe is at its most magnificent not when it is silent and orderly, but when it is filled with a chorus of countless, unique voices. The work of the archive transformed from preservation to celebration, a continuous festival of discovery where every new transmission was a gift, and every shared memory strengthened the bonds of their interstellar community. The fear of being alone was replaced by the joyful certainty of connection, a network of light and thought spanning the galaxy, proving that even the darkest silence could be filled with the sound of a million stories, finally being told. The heart of New Genesis now holds a quiet, luminous sphere, encased within flawless crystal, illuminated from a soft, internal light, rests a perfect cube of dark, rich soil brought from Earth on the final arc. It is not a grand statue or a towering spire, but a reliquary for the very ground of a lost world, a sacred piece of the whole. Children of the colony often press their hands against the cool crystal, their small fingers tracing the contours of the soil inside, a tangible connection to a home they know only through stories and archives. At its dedication, Eva Rostova, her hair silver but her posture still reflecting the captain who once faced down the void, stood before the assembled generations. Her voice, amplified by the stillness around the monument, carried the weight of lived history. Earth's final days were not an end, she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had never known any sky but this one, but a difficult birth. The pain of that moment, the loss of so many, was the labor through which our new existence began. We are its legacy, every one of us. Our story, with all its sorrow and all its hope, is forever intertwined with the stars. Her words reframed their entire journey, transforming a narrative of catastrophic loss into one of profound, hard-won continuity. The monument was not a tombstone, but a seed. It reminded them that their civilization was not a replacement for the old one, but its direct descendant, its roots forever anchored in that cube of Earth soil, even as its branches reached for the constellations. How do you honor a past without being trapped by it? You acknowledge its soil as your foundation, and then you build a new world upon it, ensuring its essence grows in a different light. The crystal sphere glowed, a permanent, gentle beacon in the central plaza, a promise that the story of Earth would never be a closed book, but a living prologue to every story yet to be told on New Genesis. The Ouroboros II slipped from its docking cradle with the quiet grace of a leviathan returning to the sea. Its hull, a fusion of human resolve and listener wisdom, caught the light of the new star born from the catalyst's rest, a constant reminder that even the most profound endings could seed radiant beginnings. This voyage was different from the desperate flight that had launched its predecessor. There was no enemy to outrun, no silent hunter to evade. Their mission now was one of gentle exploration and open-handed offering, to seek out the whispers of life in the dark and ensure no civilization would ever have to face the cosmic silence alone. They carried the complete archive, a living library of every story saved from the void, not as a trophy of survival, but as a gift of solidarity. It was a promise etched in light and data, that the memory of Earth and the hard-won lesson of the catalyst would echo through the cosmos for eternity, a testament to the unyielding resilience of life in the face of absolute finality. How do you honor a legacy of such profound loss and discovery? You do not build a monument and stand guard. You set it sailing on a billion different trajectories, trusting that each new connection will add another verse to the eternal song. The ship's course was not a line on a chart, but an ever-branching river, flowing into the unknown, carrying with it the quiet, steadfast hope that in the vastness of space, the most powerful force is not destruction, but a story willingly shared.